Hello.
Hello, Giotto. Nice to see you.
So what do we talk about today?
Well, I thought we'd talk about the illusion of the separate self. That there's
So
this
which
separate
fetter is
self.
that?
That is the first fetter. So the first fetter is the illusion there's this separate self that we have or that we are, that goes by our name, and it's the agent, controller, or experiencer of all that is happening. And we get very committed to this separate self. So much so we
Sorry,
use everything. Sorry, carry on.
how do we know that it is an illusion? So aren't you just assuming that it is an illusion?
Well, good question, really. Aren't I just assuming it's an illusion? Well, I mean, I know it's an illusion because I dispelled the illusion, and I think it's very much like Santa Claus. Once you see through it, it's so obvious that it was never there and that you were making it up, just a made
So
up
what are the
aspect.
key points that made you dispel? So let's say for me, for example, I would say Santa Claus. I will dispel by saying, how can you really in 24 hours reach like 10 billion people, and how most houses don't have chimney, and maybe the windows are closed, and there are many inconsistencies. So how did you dispel the belief in the separate self?
Well, it's a bit of an unconscious illusion, a bit like a bit less conscious, say, than the belief in Santa Claus. I mean, but then again, it's very culturally accepted, isn't it? That you are a separate self, who's the thinker of your thoughts, the controller of everything. If you raise your right hand, you assume it's something that the self is doing, right? So what you're doing,
But then who is doing it?
well, exactly. That's what you start to look for. It's easier to look for a what rather than a who, usually with these assumptions, because a who is an amorphous entity, perhaps, right, that can reach all the way through the fetters. But the first illusion is quite crude, really. So you just, with the help of a guide or with the help of it doesn't have to be a person, you could have the information in front of you, you determine what it is that you are expecting to find, like a decider of decisions, and then you verify whether or not you can actually find it. Now, I know that
wait a second. So
yeah.
So it's not that you are really saying that there is no separate self. It's more that you have a specific idea of what this separate self should be, and then you try to find that specific thing and you cannot find it, but it could be another thing. You see what I mean?
Yeah. I think I see what you mean. Try me with a different way around that one.
Yeah, so basically it's like, okay, let's say Santa Claus. I've been based on what you're saying. If we use the metaphor of Santa Claus, it's as if I was saying, when I look for Santa Claus, I'm trying to find a big guy with beard and dressed in red, and I don't find it. But maybe there is one dressed in green. You see what I mean? So are you saying that there is no separate self at all, or that we have an idea of what the separate self should be, and then we cannot find that thing we think it should be, and then we are good?
No, I'm saying there's no separate self, period.
Okay. But then how do you know? Because maybe it has a shape or form that you did not imagine or conceive. So maybe you did not find what you were expecting to find, and that's fine. But maybe there is something else that is different than what you expect to find, but it's still a separate self. How do you know that's not the case?
Well, maybe you don't know. I mean, in a way, the self-referent illusions go deeper than this particular illusion. This is like the one that wraps it all up in a bow, if you like, and says, oh, yeah, well, this is me. This is Maria.
This is me.
And yeah, this is me. This is, and connected with that are the second and third fetters, which are doubt and rites and rituals. So basically, this is me. And this is
okay. Let's stick to the first one. So if we take longer than expected, who cares? I mean, anyway, we have many years to reach conclusions, So it doesn't really matter. But basically, so this me, so it means there is no me. It means there is no agent, whatever that means. It means there is what is it then?
Okay, so most of us tend to assume, however consciously or not, that there is an experiencer of sensations. It is, I'm looking for the thinker behind thoughts. This is what I assume is there.
But isn't that
what is all?
Isn't that what we actually experience? So don't we actually experience those sensations and those thoughts? Why would we go against our experience? So, but just a second. So I will give you kind of my approach, and of course it's fine if it's different from your approach, but it's about the debate. So it's like my approach would be either I'm 100% sure of something and the threshold for proof is extremely strong, or I'd rather say I don't know. So even for Santa Claus, I mean, maybe it does exist and someone will find a dead body of a man dressed in red with a long beard bird one day in the North Pole, and they say, yeah, 5,000 years ago he was giving gift, but today that's over. I mean, we don't know. So in general, I would say, yeah, maybe it did exist, or I mean, who knows? Of course, I'm exaggerating a little bit just to send a message. But what I'm trying to say is that, let's say, my position usually is that I welcome the idea of saying I don't know. So I would rather say maybe there is an agent, maybe there isn't, but maybe we have no evidence that there is. But to say there isn't, I will expect a very, very strong burden of proof. So in some way, I would expect a very strong burden of proof to say there is an agent, but also to say there isn't an agent. And either I have this extreme proof in one of the two directions, or I will just say, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, ultimately, we can't know anything really, but I think that the point with these, which wasn't really your methodology, but it's usually a more experiential loss or absence of something that people experience. And I mean, you could say, of course, if you're looking for something, verifying whether or not you can find it and you don't find it, that could just mean you don't find it,
Yes.
But, and I understand that point of view, but at the same time, when people experience a shift with this thing, it seems like they have to continually look for that thing as if it were a real findable aspect. And it's something about repeatedly looking really, really carefully for this thing. It must exist somewhere. Okay, come on then, reveal yourself. Where are you, thinker? Is it in a little man in the box? You look within a quarter of an inch in all your experience, and there's something about continually not finding that becomes in the end, or creates a sort of experiential shift where you realize, oh, it really isn't there, and it never was there. I don't know if you experienced something similar when you looked into decisions, because for you it seemed like that was a really clear shift, but I don't know how you came to it.
But let's continue. So what you're saying, so basically you're saying that for you the realization of, let's say, that there is no separate self is more like an experiential or emotional realization, and we could say maybe there is no absolute certainty, but maybe you don't need the absolute certainty. So let's take an example. Let's say that you believe that in your house there is a gold coin. Now you search, you search. After 3 years you cannot find that gold coin. At some point you say, the chances that the gold coin is not there is so high that I will just assume the gold coin is not there. But in some way you don't have absolute proof or absolute evidence that it's not there. It's just that maybe after searching for a long time everywhere, if you don't find, you kind of start to say, at this point I've searched for so long, I've searched everywhere, I cannot find it. It's probably just not there. Is that the way it happens to you? So you think that basically by not finding it for a long time, you consider that the probability of it not existing is incredibly high, enough for you to assume it doesn't exist?
I mean, you do use to some degree that deductive process and searching process for something that is findable in experience, but it's, in the end of the day, it's not. At the end of the day, it's not a cognitive shift. It's not like a cognitive letting go, like saying, okay, the laws of probability here are against me. That gold coin really I've looked everywhere, in every single corner, centimeter of the house. It's very difficult to describe, because it's like, if it's an illusionary thing, if it's something that you're adding on like a filter to experience, this is kind of how the illusions are. And if you take that filter, if the filter comes off, you just do have a different perspective, and it's naturally more, well, it feels naturally freer, and traditionally freer of suffering. So there is a joy that you feel when you can see there is no self that you must serve and protect and defend and all that stuff. It just is obvious somehow that it really isn't and wasn't there.
So in general, you would say it's very important, of course, not to add an extra layer of story, but to ensure we are actually deconstructing a story, because we may sometimes believe we are removing, but so for example, adding the belief that there is no separate self is basically adding a belief. So you must really instead break the belief. So you must say, I believe that there is the separate self, but maybe now I'm not sure, or I think most likely there is no reason for this to be true. I have no evidence of it. I cannot find it. So it's probably not there. Is that correct?
Right. That's not how I would see a shift. That would be a more cognitive approach, which might work for some people better than others. But for most people I guide, I've got to say, and for myself, it was more of an experience. It felt more like my experience walking around the other day was that I'm thinking the thoughts, I'm doing the actions. The assumption creates like a filter, which gives a very convincing appearance of there being agency. There being a doer of deeds, a thinker of thoughts, somebody behind the scenes pulling the strings. And this process of deconstruction should really allow you to wake up one day and actually you don't feel those things. It really isn't.
So what do you
feel? Your everyday...
What do you feel after you break the fetter number one, the separate self idea?
Well, I felt very free. I felt like I'd been let out of a prison, actually, of self-referential. All my life, I had felt like I had to refer every piece of information about the world that I was living in back through this self filter. What do I think about it? What do I feel about it? And without this I in the way, it felt very free for me. And
so initially, it kind of feels like you're forced maybe to react, to have to interpret things as if you cannot just don't care. Is that what you're saying? Like that, this sense of me. So let's say information comes to you, you feel like you have to do something with it, and now you don't. You can just ignore it. Is that the feeling?
Yeah, it's not about ignoring, but it's about not appropriating or identifying. Like there is this centerpiece that needs everything to be referred back through. What do I think? What do I feel? How are people thinking about me? It's an illusion of a me that needs defending and protecting and referring to all the time as to what it thinks and feels and whether it's okay. So it's not that you're kind of indifferent as a result, but you're no longer beholden to this self-fixation. It's like a form of fixation, I would say.
So for me, the way I approach this is basically through logic. So in the same way as I will do Santa Claus, so I will say it doesn't make sense because then I will say the idea of a separate self or separate me or agent doesn't make sense because we know that the way the world operates, of course, is through the laws of physics and the principle of causality. And we know that there was the Big Bang. And from the Big Bang onwards, there is lots of causes. It's like a long chain of causes till today. And so, of course, agency requires free will. And I will define free. I will ask the question, what does free will means? And I will say, free from what? And then I will say, well, it will have to be free from causality and free from the laws of physics. But then that will mean there has to be a little box in our brain that is immune, independent from causality and the laws of physics. and that makes absolutely no sense. It's something we have never observed. It will go against everything we know when it comes to physics, etc., etc. So I say clearly the idea that there is this separate agent which has free will intended as free from the laws of physics and free from causality doesn't make sense. It's ridiculous to believe that all the universe, the galaxy, etc., follows the laws of physics, but in our brain there is a little box that ignore the laws of physics. So this is the way I kind of realized that it made no sense. So for me, it's
Sure.
Instead of trying to find and not find, it's more about realizing that it makes no sense. So it's just absurd. So why would I assume? Because at the end, those stories, those fetters which are stories, are basically assumptions. But why would I assume something which is absurd and makes no sense? Then I stop assuming it.
Sure. Well, if you really do stop assuming it, I mean, I think that this worked for you. This probably for some people it will. It's kind of easy to see through in a way. This particular fetter is not so hard. So it might be that you could do a cognitive route to it. And I think, but I still think though, when you were looking at decisions, if I recall, you kind of did look at the decision-making process and you compared, for example, an easy decision-making process like, shall I have tea or coffee, and the example of a major decision where you had to decide whether or not to have an operation.
Yes. So basically, what I struggled with decisions was that, because of course you can do this reasoning and saying it makes no sense to believe there is a little box in our brain that is immune from the laws of physics. So you drop the belief because it makes no sense.
Right.
But then when you take a decision, especially an important decision, it really feels that you are deciding. So it feels that a decision is happening. And so yes, on the logical side, you know that there is no agency and there is no free will because it makes no sense. But then on the experiential side, you actually feel you are deciding, and it really feels that some actual decision is being made. And so the realization I had was that, but then for a simple thought, the answer was more obvious to me. So let's say, do I want to eat chocolate ice cream or strawberry ice cream? And then I will immediately realize that it's just a preference. So somewhere in my brain, a preference is stored, and I either prefer chocolate ice cream or strawberry ice cream, and I'm just going to choose the one I prefer. So I wouldn't really call it a decision because it's so instantaneous, it's so instinctive, that I will call it a preference. But then let's say a big decision. Let's say, for example, I have cancer, and should I do the operation? And let's say that the way the operation works is that if I do the operation, there is 50% chance of dying, but also 50% chance of surviving. So I will die instantly. If I would either die on the 50%, I will die on the operating table, 50% I will survive, and I will be good for many, many years. Or I will die within 5 years. And it's such a complicated decision that it feels very different from the ice cream decision. But then the realization I had is that, yes, it's a very complex decision, but it's actually more like a chain of thought. So it's like, this is the word I use, chain of thought, you remember? So it's like I have a first thought which produce another thought and another thought and another thought. And those thoughts may contain emotion, may contain thinking about how other people will feel about it, how I will feel about certain things I will miss, certain things I will not miss, and certain fears and certain worries and certain ideas. And it will just be a very long chain of thought, but eventually it will just conclude into a final thought. And also another thing that I realized, this was later, much later, that the word decision is kind of loaded with an implicit feeling that someone is deciding. So it kind of implies agency. But you can easily replace the word decision or deciding with the word hesitation or to hesitate. And now this one is the same concept. It expresses the same idea, but it's not loaded with the idea that there has to be a decider. So when you say decision, you really feel there has to be a decider. But when you say hesitation, you don't feel there has to be a hesitator. You just feel your brain is processing stuff. Your brain is hesitating. So that's the path that I followed.
That's a good one, because you don't even notice a lot of decision making. Did you decide to pick up that bottle and have a swig? Or did it just happen? So much is on automatic. It's only when it's a bigger, more consequential decision, you could say a weighty thing that you have to weigh up, literally, that you notice the hesitation factor, that it is you're noticing in effect the hesitation, aren't you, more than anything else, because you've stopped doing something automatic, and you have to allow a bit more thought about the subject, about the topic, until, like you say, there is some kind of conclusion that happens. But
I would say in general, so a lot of decisions are most decisions are unconscious anyway.
They are.
And some decisions are conscious. But the fact that I think the only difference, and this is something I was thinking about, the only difference between a conscious decision and an unconscious decision is that let's say between instinctive decision, let's say, maybe it's not the same conscious and unconscious, but I think there is a strong overlap. So let's say, and is the difference between an instinctive decision or unconscious decision or a conscious and well-thought decision is really that in the conscious decision, the why you're doing it, the motivation and the reason for the conscious decision. For the unconscious decision, you don't know the motivation. But we tend to fall into the trap of believing that conscious means there is an agent and unconscious means there is no agent. But it doesn't have to be. They may very well they could very well both have agent or both have no agent. The difference between conscious and unconscious decision is not if there is agent or not. It's just if you're aware of the motivation. And really, when I decide if to eat chocolate ice cream or strawberry ice cream, I don't know the reason why I prefer chocolate or strawberry. So I will call it unconscious or preference or instinctive. Whereas if it's a very complex decision, I usually have to think very clearly about what the reasons are, and I'm aware of the motivations. But I think there may be this illusion that conscious equal agent and unconscious equal no agent, but it's wrong. It's more conscious equal you're aware of the motivation, unconscious you're not aware of the motivation.
Sure. And even consciousness itself, you could question later on down the line, but not with the self-illusion. But I was just going to say there's something important what you say about preference as well, because a lot of people can also identify with the sheer familiarity of their preferences. That most decisions, as you say, happen on automatic. Most thoughts happen on automatic when you look and try to see how much control you actually have over these thoughts that are happening. But just the sheer familiarity of, I always go for chocolate ice cream rather than strawberry, or I always do this rather than that, or I always think this rather than that, or even the familiarity of, say, your voice or your appearance in a mirror. It can all add up to this. You'll use anything basically to shore up the belief that this is a me doing it, preferring it, deciding it, thinking it, saying it, whatever.
But I would say in general, I think in some way all thoughts are kind of automatic. It's not that it's this something you offer as an exercise to say, like think of a number and the number just pop. You don't really, let's say I think of the number 6. I don't really know why I thought of the number 6, but it just pops, So I will say probably all thoughts are automatic. The only difference is that some thoughts, they come accompanied with their motivations and some they don't. And the motivation, by the way, is also part of the thought. So it's like some thoughts, it's a small package, let's say, it's just the thought, like 6. And some thoughts is the thought with its motivation. So I want to eat food because I'm hungry, or I mean, this is a very simple one. Or I want to do this because of that. So I will say, if there is the motivation, I will call it conscious. I will call it conscious because it contains the motivation. If it doesn't contain the motivation, I will call it unconscious because I don't know the motivation.
Right.
But I will say they are all automatic. There is no thought that is manual in some way. All thoughts are automatic, just that some come with the motivation and some without. What do you think?
Right. Yeah, I'd have to think about that some more. Yes, I would have to think. There you go. It's in the language, isn't it? But motivation, I'm not so sure, because I think that some things, for example, you get the sensation of growling or rumbling in the tummy, and a thought might occur, oh, I'm hungry. The next thought occur, oh, I should eat something, or I'll go and eat something. And that, and you could say that's a motive because you have this sensation of hunger, but actually it's just a thought following a sensation, or associated. Let's say it follows kind of quite naturally from feeling the hunger pangs to wanting to look in the fridge to see what have I got in there, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was a bad example. But let's say, for example, I could say I want to buy a house. So I could say, I look at the house and say, wow, I really like it. And I would say that's unconscious. I don't know the motivation. But I could say, wow, the position is perfect. It's like 100 meters away from the school, 100 meters away from the beach, and near that supermarket. I like, so you see the difference. It's some thoughts come with their motivation, some come without.
Yeah. Oh, I get you. Yeah, no, I it's funny because I do a lot of these kind of thought exercises, if guiding self-illusion, and some people say like can use those sequential thoughts as like, oh, I found evidence that there is a thinker, and what it boils down to is exactly what you said. You can look at a map and see, oh, that house is a good house because, and then there's the list of reasons. You have got a particular checklist in your head of what you want and what you don't want. But it's like we have got the ability, it seems, to think something through to a conclusion. It's like we can use the thought constructs to think through a problem. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to do very much, right? I mean, even if you think of it as like enough sequential thoughts to construct a shopping list and then follow through by actually getting the things on the list, or to plan a journey, or to plan buying a house, exactly as you're saying. So I think there's a certain amount of we can do it for, say, if you watch your mind, probably you can do it for like 5-10 minutes at a time. You can't even usually do it for a straight 20 minutes, most people.
So what exactly, sorry, what is it exactly that you can do for straight 10 minutes?
Well, follow a logical or sequential series of thoughts to a particular aim.
Like focus on a chain of thought, let's say.
Yeah, let's say, and actually keep it in line roughly. You'll find that other thoughts will pop in and intrude, like, oh,
then some other stuff will intrude. I see. Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
Some people,
but
some people, for
general,
example,
sorry.
No, just some people have the illusion that they're completely in control of their thoughts and they can decide what kind of thoughts they think, and it's quite entertaining.
That's ridiculous
sometimes.
Because again, if you ask them to pick a random number, they will say a number, and if you ask them why they pick that number, they have no idea.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Most of the time, we don't really know what causes our thought. I mean, there must be something that causes it, because at the end, our brain is part of reality and it follows the laws of physics and causality, but we are not aware. We are not aware of what causes a thought.
No, we're not. Yeah.
But basically, the fact that a thought is conscious, intended as we are aware of its motivation, doesn't imply in any way that there is a separate agent making a decision free from causality, as in free will.
No, it just means we can gather thoughts in a particular, direction for a limited number, a limited amount of time, and something comes of that, maybe, like a decision or I don't know, or an action of some kind. But it's not that there was a you behind it, orchestrating the thoughts or deciding, you tell people, well, just think happy thoughts for 5 minutes. Most people can't even do that. It's
okay, I see.
To
but
look
do you
at
think that there is any relationship that but because you say you cannot control your thought, but does that prove in any way that there is no agent? I mean, maybe there is no whether there is an agent, maybe there is an agent that is not able to control its own thought, or there could be no agent and one can control their thought. Why is it related, the idea of not being able to control the thought, with the idea of agent?
Because most people feel like they're almost an author of their thoughts. So like somebody's writing the book, you know, somebody's writing the thoughts.
They assume there is someone who is generating the thought, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, you know, basically you ask people to look for that someone who's behind the thoughts and doing the thoughts. And if there really was a someone, well, why wouldn't he just think about good thoughts or happy thoughts or his preferred kind of thoughts? Or, you know, why would this someone, if you had it, you know, think all these random thoughts, or thoughts that are quite dark, or thoughts that are quite, you know, irrelevant to the...
Well, maybe that someone is not smart. It's like, it doesn't have to be smart. So I wouldn't necessarily say that because they're not always happy thought, this is a proof that there is not that agent.
Right. It's just that most people do seem to assume that they so assume that they're in control and they're authoring the thoughts. But when they spot that they haven't done it, that they're not doing it, and they catch that in action, the thoughts are just... it's like, am I looking, you know, am I seeing a bird, or is it just seeing a bird? Is it an eye seeing a bird, or is it just seeing a bird? And similarly with thoughts, is it I thinking the thought, or is it just thoughts happening? And I think when people see this thing of thoughts just happening without a seeming agent behind them, there does come a kind of, oh, okay, something I thought was there isn't there.
So I think I understand. Sorry, I think I understand where you're coming from. So basically, you are saying that most people believe in the agent because they believe they can control their thoughts. And so when you prove to them that they cannot control their thought, then they also stop believing in the agent, because the reason they believed in the agent was because they believe they can control the thought, and proving to them that they cannot control the thought, then they just stop believing in the agent too. So the only reason they believe in the agent is because they also believe that they can control their thought. You prove them that they cannot control their thought, so they drop the belief in the agent. Is that the procedure you use?
Well, normally I go in on different angles. So I look for an experiencer of sensation. So like I said, is it I looking at the bird, or is it just looking at the bird? You look for the I bit of the in your actual experience, and usually you can't find it. It's just, you know, what feels more natural to the experience that you're having right now. Is it I am sitting on a chair, or is it just that you feel the sensations, you know, of sitting on a chair?
Well, for sure.
So where's the I? So we use, sorry.
I was saying, for sure, I know I'm sitting on the chair, right? But then I don't know if there is an I or not sitting on the chair. I know I'm sitting on the chair. The rest, I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, but then we use, you know, we use a lot of, with the first illusion, we do use a lot of just sensation only kind of approach. So from a sensation only approach, do you even know, can you even know the difference between, you know, your arm and the armrest? You know, on a sensation level alone, you don't even feel a borderline or a separation. But I don't know if that particular methodology works for you.
But if someone hit with a hammer the armrest, it's completely different. It hit with a hammer my arm. So it depends on the circumstance. So maybe in normal circumstances, I'm just sitting and relaxing, I cannot really feel the difference. But if someone were to hit my arm with a hammer versus the armrest with a hammer, I will definitely feel the difference.
Sure, you'd feel sensations, you know. Yeah, for sure. But anyway, I mean, just coming back to what we can come back to that if you like. But I mean, basically, I look in 3 or 4 areas where people tend to feel there is definitely this agent called self, called Maria, called Giotto, whatever. And you look in thinking, deciding, and experiencing of sensations. So it's not that you don't experience the sense. It's not that the sensations aren't experienced. Yes, they are, including nice ones or a hammer on the arm. Yes, but is there a Giotto who feels the owl, or is it just the owl happening? Okay, you could say, well, it's you rather than me. It's true.
Yeah, so this is something I was telling you, I remember for a long time.
Yeah.
So we were discussing about this idea of identity, and you were like, but why do you believe there is separate identity? And we're like, well, I believe there is separate identity because if I take a hammer and I hit my foot, I feel the pain. If I take the hammer and hit your foot, I don't feel the pain, but you feel the pain. So how can we say there is no separate identity?
Yeah, well, there's definitely, it seems, something that goes by your name, walking around, and in a different country to me, and so on. But does that mean that there is a separate self that resides in this particular formation?
Yeah, I think we have to define what is a separate self. So, because of course, if we say that this separate self has agency, that is, it has free will, that is, it is free from causality, then probably not.
Okay. Yeah.
But what if that agent is just a passive receiver? So imagine, for example, that reality is like a movie theater, and we are all sitting on the chairs, but the chairs are not all in the same position. So we are looking at the screen, but from different chairs. So we have slightly different perspectives. So maybe the reality is just the same. So there is no me as Giotto, but there is a chair which is seeing the world from the perspective of Giotto. And maybe there is a chair. So you will be an identity, not as in free will, but an identity as something completely passive that can only perceive, but will perceive a particular point of view. So it's like, because if we are sitting in a movie theater, and let's say I'm sitting in that chair and you're sitting in another chair, we are both looking straight at the screen. I'm not looking at your chair and you're not looking at my chair. But we perceive the movie from the perspective of the chair. We don't influence the movie, so there is no agency. I do not influence the movie. You do not influence the movie. There is the movie, but I'm more on the left, you're more on the right. So we see kind of different details. We hear the sound in a slightly different way. So what do you think about this?
Well, yes, it seems like, we do have to walk around in separate, for some people call it meat suits, which I really don't like, because actually I think that's not an accurate, it's not just a sort of physical entity thing either. The point being no entity, I guess, as in a soul or a little man in the box. But, there is definitely a physical living organism here in this seat and in that seat. Let's put it like that.
Because I think the entity or the me is problematic only and is problematic and contradictory only if we give it free will. But if we remove free will, there may very well be that entity that receives only with no free will. That doesn't produce any contradiction.
Yeah, the only problem being that people so want to cling on to the idea of this free will entity machine, as it were, that they will. I think if you start just saying, I think the reason I make it categorical and say there is no self whatsoever, blah, blah, is because of doubt, which is the second fetter, comes in. And it's basically the self-referent illusion that there's something about us, the doubting perplexity ability, by which we're, we it's basically like a defense mechanism for when life indicates we might be wrong about ourselves and the world around us. And it's basically like an armor. We can now rationalize any view that we have. And I think that people do that a lot with the self. For example, in the Buddhist community I was in, people believed in a self, but an impermanent self, right? So it was a way around this thing. So they still kind of ended up with an intact illusion of self, but it's just one that is malleable, one that is always changing, one that is always evolving. Do you see what I mean? So that's why I prefer the more, I guess, there are also other websites which express it in this way, in this slightly absolutist, there is no self. And you could say, well,
so just a
doubt
second
anything.
before I forget, I want to ask a few questions. So first of all, in the thing where you say, so this is interesting. So they kind of created an extra story of the idea to justify the belief that there is no self, but reconcile it with reality where they experience a self. They basically say that, yes, there is a self, but it's temporary. And so in reality, eventually there is no self. So basically there is no self, but there is a self. But they have just added a new story. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, not exactly that story. It's more a sort of like story about an ever evolving self. So mixed in with that were ideas of evolution or evolution of consciousness, all these kind of ideas. So it was in a way trying to keep the I suppose it's keeping the baby. I don't know, that baby in the bathwater metaphor. I can't remember.
Both the baby and the bathwater.
Right.
Because usually it's keep the baby and throw the bathwater, no?
Right. Yes, that's it. That's it. So yeah, it's a way of keeping the baby, and you're trying to anyway. Keep the baby and the. I can't do that metaphor. Forget that. Edit it out. Whatever. But yeah, it's a way of trying to keep keep the illusion of the self, but rationalize it as being a different kind of self to the one that most people believe in, which is like
the self, but make it something else. So you basically, so instead of removing the idea of self, you transform the idea of self in a new idea, but you're basically just creating a new story.
Yes.
You're not really removing the story of self, you're creating a new story.
Yeah,
you're giving a different nature to the self.
Yeah. You're also, it's like a way out of the problem of having to remove an illusion, which maybe you cherish, maybe you like that particular illusion, but you can rationalize it as still being on the, say, waking up or enlightenment path by saying, well, it's an ever evolving, changing self. So of course it's like creating a better and bigger self rather than actually just seeing there isn't one in the first place. If you know what I mean.
And if you push it all the way, it becomes I'm the all and this kind of nonsense. So a new story, which is I'm the all, that's it. I have no separate self, I'm the all, I'm one with everything.
Yeah.
But again, you have just transformed, basically, you have transformed the self into something else, which is a new story. So you have not removed the story of self, you have just transformed it into a new story.
Yeah, no, it's true, actually. And those stories, I guess, can be part of the. I mean, I didn't mention it, but normally the second and third fetter disappear along with the first one. So the second one is doubt.
Before we go to the second one, because I like the second one, because I think I never really understood what it's about, but also I consider doubt as a very positive thing, whereas I assume that they see it as a negative. So I want to have this debate later. But first I wanted to ask, but doesn't Buddha say something like that he points and he say, this is not the self, this is not the self, it just points to everything and say, this is not the self, but it doesn't actually say there is no self. Whereas aren't you saying there is no self?
Well, you don't want to just replace one belief with another belief, and I think that's what he was getting at there. It's you don't come, people can make a religion out of anything or reify. People reify emptiness as if that is an actual thing. So yes, it's safer ground, isn't it, to just say, there is no self in thoughts, there is no self in decisions, there is no self in. It's if you want to phrase it like that, then perhaps that's closer to how the Buddha would have phrased it. Yeah.
But then, because the way I will interpret it from Buddha will be that maybe he just say that we have no idea what the self is. So it's not positively saying that it doesn't exist. Say, well, you think the self is this? No, you're wrong. It's not this. You think it's the body? No. I think there is something called the five skandha. I don't really remember what they are, but one is the soul, one is the body, and there are three more that I don't remember. Maybe the mind, whatever that means. But the idea is that Buddha say this is not the self. He points to something. This is not the self. So what you basically you come to him and you say, is this the self? And whatever you say no. But then he doesn't say there is no self. So it's more like he's saying you have absolutely no idea what the self is, and whatever you believe the self is, it's not. But it's not positively saying there is no self. It's just saying you cannot reduce it to something. You cannot say the self is this. The self is something you have no idea what it is. That's the way I would interpret it.
Well, it's not quite how I'd interpret it, but I mean, yeah, there is no you in this, there is no you in that, there is no, I mean, but then where is it then? I mean, have you found it somewhere else?
Yeah, but again, back to the idea that you may very well have not found it, but it's still there. Like Pluto existed before we discovered it. You couldn't argue that Pluto does not exist just because you have not found it.
Yeah, with all our advanced science and, you know, ability to go to the stars and all the rest of it, we still haven't found a self. I mean, I haven't.
Yeah, but also remember that science discovers something new every day. So like imagine like 2 years ago, we thought that computers will never think, you know. Now just 2 years ago, we invented ChatGPT, and now you can talk to a computer, and people thought that this maybe will never happen, but it has happened 2 years ago. So who knows, maybe we will go to Mars in 20 years. I mean, we don't know. So science keeps discovering new things. So saying that something does not exist because science has not yet discovered it doesn't really make sense, considering that science discovers new things every year.
Yeah. Would you like to keep it a little chink open then, though? I mean, you know, there's health, and for me, there's healthy doubt, if you like, and there's kind of this kind of doubt that belongs to the second fetter. I think that having a questioning mind and doubting, you know, in terms of like not necessarily believing whatever you hear, or even whatever you think is great, is a great quality, and can definitely help loosen any illusion as well, because you can start to see through it. But I think there's another kind of doubt, which is the second fetter kind of doubt, is the way that we armor ourselves really against and rationalize with to impose whatever view we have on top of whatever is actually confronting us, if you know what I mean. What is it?
But I'm not sure I understand.
Okay. It's like we have this doubting mechanism, so that if we're, you know, how some people are like knee-jerk kind of cynical, so you can be exposed to something that's true, but because you have developed such a sort of armor of your own views, you're not even going to entertain it. You know, you resist it, you deflect it. So the evidence could be in front of your face, and you're still saying no, but the world is flat. You know.
Oh, okay. So what you mean, what you think the second fetter means by doubt is not actually some kind of healthy skepticism, but it's more a cynical rejection. So rather than doubt, I will call it complete rejection. Like, you know, like the horses, how you call it in English? They wear this thing.
Blinkers. The blinkers.
Yeah, the blinders or blinkers.
Blinkers.
What is it? Blinkers. So the horse, they wear this thing and they can only see in front. So basically for you, doubt is not healthy skepticism, but rather absolute rejection of anything that is new. So by default, you reject anything that doesn't match your current beliefs. That's because to me, that's not doubt. To me, that's just stupidity or close-mindedness or rejection. Whereas you say that this is called doubt. This is the second fetter. I mean, in Buddhism, this is what is called, this is intended as second fetter for doubt.
Yeah, it's the second fetter. It's specifically doubt about whether there is a self. You know, you really want there to be. So you're going to, you know, damn well believe in it, even against all evidence that there isn't, you know, an agency, for example, running your life. You are going to persist in that because that's what you believe, and you are able, you know, you're fully armored and able to resist and deflect any evidence that comes your way in contrary to your view.
So and for you, this doubt is really this strong desire and practice of just rejecting anything new that conflicts with your current belief. You just want to hold to your beliefs.
Yes, you just want to hold to your beliefs. I think that's a good description, actually. But it's surprising. It can be a surprising roadblock, you know, but it does tend to fall alongside the first illusion, when that goes, when you no longer believe in an agent and a thinker and a, so on, it usually dispels this particular one, because it's as if this particular quality is developed in order to defend the self-illusion, so it falls alongside it.
So you think it's just to defend fetter 1, self-illusion, or it's also to defend the other 8 fetters above it, fetter number 2?
I think it's more to defend the self-illusion. I mean,
they
all follow on backwards, actually, from fetter 10 to 1. So what follows, in a way, it's like the final wrapping up of who you are. And then the third fetter is kind of, this is what I do and this is what I don't do. So it's again a kind of shoring up of the agency factor. This is what I do and this is what I don't do. And along with that, you can identify with particular rituals. It could just be like everyday type of rituals, like I always brush my teeth before I wash my face. I mean, it could be as simple as that, but it could be particular ethical or religious observances, such that we become attached to them, and it's something that we resonate with. So it, but it becomes who we are. Part of who we are is that we do this action and this action and this action, and that one.
So for me, so fetter 3, like beliefs and rituals, the way I understood it was that you believe that you can reach enlightenment by performing specific rituals. That's the way I understood. Right. Is it correct?
Yeah. Well, I think that's how it also manifests. In a religious person who's trying to actually wake up according to the Buddha's, instruction, then it would manifest like that. You would think, well, as long as I, light the candles in the correct order, and as long as I chant X amount of mantras per day, and as long as I don't fail in my ethics, it's like sort of magical thinking.
So you also extend rituals to stuff like ethics and morality and good deeds, bad deeds, or you restrict it to stuff like candles? And what is the scope for you of rituals? Because one could argue that doing good, the idea that you have to do good deeds could be a ritual. It's a ritualized belief, no?
It can be, for sure. Yes,
so it can be. Would you include it in fetter 3, the idea of ethics and morality and karma, as just a ritual of fetter 3, or not? Or is it a simpler ritual?
I think that it can certainly be used in service of that particular illusion. People will definitely latch on to those ideas about, certain, they're all in a way things that we've dreamed up, aren't they? These ethical rule books. And they might have more use or less use to us as human beings. On the whole, for example, it's probably better to not go around killing people, and it depends.
But this is because there is a practical consequence. But basically, my view of the ritual is that the ritual is the expectation that so I will describe it like this. My view of the ritual is the expectation that some action that shouldn't have any consequence, like lighting a candle, will have consequence. So of course, if you go killing someone, you can expect that the police will catch you. So this is expected to have consequences. Right. But the ritual of, let's say, doing good deeds in general and expecting good karma is similar to lighting a candle. It's something that, if you help an old lady cross the street, it shouldn't have any consequence.
Right.
But if you believe it has a consequence, then in some way you're thinking in a ritualized way. So helping the old lady to cross the street is a ritual, just like lighting a candle. It's the idea that certain action that have no direct consequence would have some kind of magical consequence. Do you agree with this?
Yes, it is. I think a lot of magical thinking goes into dependence on rites and rituals, often like that. Like if I do this, then I'll be good and I'll have a good outcome. If I do this, I'll be bad and have some terrible outcome. And but basically it's like we've identified so much with a particular set of beliefs or set of actions that they've become also who we are. So it's also we are, by doing that action, we're somehow reinforcing the self. This is who I am. I'm a good person. I do good works. I do, I always meditate at 6 a.m. and I always go to bed at 10 p.m.
So those rituals reinforce our belief in the self. So basically we could say fetter 1 is the idea of the self as agency. Fetter 2 is trying to protect the self by not allowing any new idea. Fetter 2. And fetter 3 is the idea that those rituals kind of are the self, protect the self. The self is good because blah, blah, blah. Is that correct?
Yeah, like there's some, well, sort of like, I think the third one is more like we have something that resonates, or maybe even the kind of depository or a storehouse for what we do and don't do. It's like, we become attached. It's an attachment to particular observances. Yeah, it's an attachment, you could say.
But it's an attachment because of the belief that they are effective, because the underlying story that make us want to hold to it is the story or the belief that those are effective. Because if we believe that lighting the candle is ineffective, or that there is no karmic reward for helping the old lady cross the street, we may very well not do it unless it's our preference, which makes sense maybe for helping the old lady cross the street, but probably not for lighting the candle unless we light candlelight.
Yeah, I think it goes when we realize, when the first fetter falls away, we realize that the rites and the rituals we were attached to weren't actually reinforcing anything or anyone. So it's like we see through those as well, such, that it all falls away. So, I mean, for me, it was definitely quite clear suddenly that I was still in a Buddhist context when I saw through the first illusion, and suddenly quite a lot of the rituals that we were doing had this fervent sort of self-protection feeling, and I could see that people got a certain security out of doing them. Like, for example, there was a tradition of doing confessions in a circle, with a group of people. Now, it wasn't that people really felt they needed to unburden themselves of something they'd done or said, but it had become a ritual in that, it was a good thing to do. So people were like
it kind of makes you feel more in control. You will say the ritual makes you feel more in control. Is it correct?
Yeah, I think it feels like it reinforces that there's a self who needs protection.
A self that needs protection. Okay, I see.
Yeah, more than anything. Yeah.
Okay, so we went through basically fetters 1, 2, and 3 here.
We did.
In this video. Okay.
In short form, anyway. Yeah, I think we did.
I see. Okay.
Good.
Okay, so then we continue next time with fetter number 4 then.
Yeah, well, 4 and 5 normally run together.
4 and 5 together. Okay, 4 and 5 together. Yeah. Next video we do 4 and 5.
Yeah, or we'll see how we go with time, but they usually come together. They're like flip side of the coin.